The first exercise I'm going to show you is color saturation. And this exercise is quite good for a couple of things. First of all, you will see how a color can saturate by just adding more layers on top of the first ones. So in this exercise, I'm going to put a layer of color in each of these squares, and then I will add a second layer from the second square onwards, a third layer from the third square, and so on. So the first square will have one layer of color, and the last one, the fifth square, will have 5 layers of color. And you will see how color can saturate by just adding layers. Because with watercolor, it's important that you build up the color rather than using a very thick mix from the beginning, because with a thick mix it's not gonna work. So you would have problems afterwards. And then also you will get to know your colors by doing this exercise. You will get to practice coloring inside a space, and I will show you this exercise in 2 colors. So I have, let me turn it maybe this way. So I have a blue, Winsor blue red shade, and Aureolin yellow. They're both transparent, and this will show you how, for example, with light colors, you can't really achieve saturation after a certain point. So it would become darker but very slightly. So when you want to darken a yellow, you will have to use other methods, which I won't discuss here because this is just a class 4 exercises. Let's start with this exercise, and I've made quite a bit of color here because one important thing with this exercise is that you need to use the same mix. You can't make more if it's not enough, because it will change then the strength of the color, and then you won't have a good result, something that you can trust. And the mix is quite diluted, so I will show you in this one. So it shouldn't be too diluted that you barely see it, but it shouldn't be dark either. And I'm using a Winsor & Newton Series 7 brush, but you can use whatever brush you have handy. And then I'm just going to do the same thing with the yellow. And if you notice, every time I pick up the color, I mix it in the well, because the pigments, depending on the color, but usually the pigments tend to deposit at the bottom. So you want to mix, especially if you have 2 colors mixed together, you want to do this. But even with 1 color, you want to give it a little mix every time you pick up the color. Alright, so the first row is dry now, and one way you can see if it's dry, you can tilt it. You can see the yellow is shiny, so that means it's still wet, and this is it's matte now. And you can also dab your finger like that, and you can tell if it's kind of cold. It means that it's still not completely dry. So once it's completely dry, you can do the second layer. And this is how I like to do my watercolor paintings in layers, because it's easier to, first of all, if it's quite light, you can start even lighter than this. And if it's quite light, you will be able to correct any mistakes that might happen. So let's start with the second layer. If you have too much paint, you can dab your brush on the paper towel and then just dab it in the drop here so you can pick it up. Okay, so I'm going to do this again for the yellow and then just repeat it so the third layer is from the third square and leave the first two untouched, just with 1 and 2 layers. As you build up the color, it will take longer and longer to dry, but just make sure that the previous layer is dry. Otherwise, you might do some unwanted special effects on your squares. So this one should be okay. So we do the last layer on the blue. And this is, of course, it's true for your painting as well. If you're painting in layers, make sure that your previous layer is completely dry before you apply your next layer. Alright, so as you can see from this exercise, when you put many layers on top of each other, you will build up the color. But you can build it up to a certain point. Maybe we can add another 1 or 2 layers to this blue, but if you want a really dark blue, then you will have to add another color. There are different ways to do shadows, but this exercise is very good, and you should do it with all your colors, all the ones that you want to use at least, because you will really get to know them. And as you can see, the yellow is always of course lighter, and it doesn't really get that much darker no matter how many layers you put on top of it. I can take a picture with the in black and white, and this will show you even better what I mean with the intensity of the color. So as you can see, with the blue you can see that this is lighter, and as you add layers it becomes darker. But with the yellow you can hardly see, well, there's really not much difference in there when you take a black and white photo. And I advise you to do this with your paintings as well. If you're painting, like, I don't know, let's say a landscape, the best thing to do with a painting is to have contrast in your composition. So what you want to do is to see the contrast. You take a picture in black and white, and you will see if your painting looks like the yellow squares, so without much contrast, then you will want to add some shadows and some highlights somewhere. Especially the shadows, they define your painting quite well. But if your painting looks like there are different saturation points like this, so you have the lights, you have the darks, and you have the midtones, then you're doing a good job. Carry on. Okay. So this is the first exercise, and in the next exercise we're going to do a flat wash, and I'm going to show you a couple of ways to do it, wet in wet and wet on dry. Okay, I'll see you in the next lesson.